Welcome to First Flight, a new podcast by FlightGlobal. I'm your host, Amber Elias, and in this episode, I'll be speaking with the new chair of Airports Council International World, Candace McGraw. Candace began her 2-year term in January 2024, and she now chairs the ACI World Governing Board that consists of 28 leading airport CEOs. McGraw is also the Chief Executive Officer of Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport. Candace, welcome to First Flight.
Thanks, Amber. I appreciate you having me.
So how did you get started working in aviation?
I got started in aviation purely by happenstance. So I am a lawyer by training, and many years ago, out of law school, I wanted to do public sector work. And so I joined the city of Cleveland as a municipal attorney. And in Cleveland, in the U.S., the airport is owned by the city of Cleveland. And they were in need of a lawyer, and so I became the airport's lawyer. And the more and more involved I got in issues, I realized what a fascinating business. And for me, it's a great blend of sort of public sector work, benefiting your community, with an overlay of a global international business that's so interesting. And so it stuck. And that's how I became involved in aviation.
Fantastic. And what is the role of ACI World?
So ACI is Airport Council International, and it's a trade association representing the world's airports. And, sort of the tagline is the global voice of airports. And so ACI is a federated organization. There's the World Organization that sits in Montreal, and then each of 5 regions is represented around the world. We have a North American region, Latin America, Asia Pacific and Middle East, Africa, and Europe. And each of those 5 offices coordinate with ACI World at the center, representing, at this point, I think it's over 2,100 airports in 191 countries. So what the role of the organization is to really talk about global framework, work with ICAO, look at certain safety standards, certain regulatory schemes that are going to help airports grow and be safe and coordinate with each of the regions globally.
So what are some of the challenges facing airports today? Obviously, you mentioned something like safety. Is that a consideration of every airport and the biggest consideration?
Well, we always say in our business, safety is the number one paramount issue, to ensure that airports are safe for all of our friends and neighbors and families to fly to and from. But, when you think about where each of the aviation standards are globally, some nation states are more developed in their regulatory framework. Some regions are more developed in certain standards and inspections and training of staff. So I think that's an issue where ACI does a lot of training, particularly in developing nations, to make sure that, one, that the airports are built according to international standards that we know take safety into consideration, and then airport personnel are trained. So that, to me, is a huge issue. I mean, some of the other issues that I think airports are universally globally focused on, of course, are customer experience. We want to make sure passengers have a good experience going through our facilities. Working on, of course, workforce development issues. All businesses globally are struggling to find the right folks for the right positions. How do we as a trade association play in that space? Certainly, the environmental sustainability issues are a huge focus globally, and we can talk about some of that. Digitalization, right? Evolving our business. And then, of course, the pandemic highlighted the need for some sort of regulatory framework where we can work with the World Health Organization, other similar organizations, to make sure people and goods can flow freely, even in these, the darkest of times like the pandemic. So no shortage of good issues to work on.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot, seems, for everyone all over the world and all airports to consider. You mentioned sustainability, which is obviously the future of aviation. How can we see that represented in airports, and how can we see that sort of as passengers have that impact in the airport?
I think so many different ways airports are playing a role. I mean, let's maybe start with our friends at ACI Europe, which I think, frankly, are the region that are leading the discussions and at the forefront of making sure sustainability is a conversation in every conversation when our members meet. So a number of years ago, ACI Europe started an airport carbon accreditation program. So globally, we have the goal to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And right now in that carbon accreditation program, there are over 560 airports already participating. Some at the very beginning stages of just doing, baseline assessments of where they are relative to their, carbon emissions. And then some that have gone to sort of a level 5 accreditation, which is the highest in this program, where they already have a net zero carbon footprint. So I think, depending where you are on that evolution of knowledge, but airports are very keenly focused on playing a role in that achieving that net carbon emissions by 2050. We do that by simple things like recycling programs in the airport, right? Asking folks to bring water bottles with them, trying to use green materials in all of our construction programs, etc. So I think that's a huge issue. Another issue relative to sustainability is the development and use of sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, which is, again, one of the key issues we talk about working with our airline partners, because they're all keenly focused on reaching that goal as well. And the only way to do that is to have both the airports and particularly the airlines and ground handlers focus on using sustainable aviation fuel, electrification, of course, and how do airports work with ground handlers, carriers, to make sure you have the microgrid in place to handle all of the electrification. A lot of research is being done now around hydrogen and either aircraft, again, or ground equipment. And then one of the most interesting things recently, ACI has partnered with the World Economic Forum to create a program called Airports of Tomorrow. And it's really looking at 4 pillars around infrastructure, sustainable aviation fuel, finance, and innovation, particularly in the areas of green finance, innovation around sustainable aviation fuel. And a lot of the discussion is, do you take airports from passenger hubs to essentially energy hubs for their communities? So long-winded answer to all sorts of environmental things going on.
No, it's fascinating. And do airports need to change how they look or operate or function with the introduction of some of these sustainable inventions like SAF or electrified vehicles?
And so that's what we're working with now, right? Definitely infrastructure needed for electrification. Definitely some infrastructure that's going to be needed around SAF. And so I'll give my airport as an example. We're in the process right now. We did a utility master plan. We did some sort of, baseline studies around this, looking at passenger forecasts, trying to figure out, all right, how do we bolster our infrastructure to do it? We're, I would say, farther behind than some of our European counterparts that are already there. But we worked with our cargo carriers here. We're the largest North American hub for DHL and Amazon. In the U.S., we have a joint cargo hub here, or dual cargo hub, and working to form a sustainable aviation fuel coalition to talk with both our state government and national government about what can we do here at CVG to make our infrastructure ready for development and use of SAF.
And has there been a lot of support from the community and other businesses around the airport to introduce some of those new grids and new infrastructure?
Here specifically, yes. And I can talk about my colleagues in the U.S., which have, I have a colleague in Pittsburgh who has stood up their own microgrid. Same thing with a colleague in Louisville. So I think the airports and their communities and their air carriers appreciate the need. I know, again, Europe is far ahead of every other region of the world in this instance, and I know it's being discussed at every region around the world, inclusive of Africa, who's really leaning into this as they're developing new airports, are our colleagues in India, right? How to do this in a way, particularly if you're doing some greenfield development, to really be thoughtful of putting in all of these infrastructure developments up front in a sustainable manner.
And you mentioned sort of COVID and coming out of COVID and the need for a more cohesive freight system within the airports. Have you seen the traffic at the airports rise to the pre-pandemic levels yet?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. Certain regions of the world have bounced back more quickly, but globally in 2023, we ended the year at 8.6 billion passengers, which is about 94% of the pre-pandemic levels, but forecasted to end 2024 actually at 9.2 billion passengers, which is, phenomenal amount of passengers, which is actually 102% of the pre-pandemic levels. And I'm hopeful as some countries in Asia start to reopen, we'll see those folks come back into the fold. The recovery was spotty, but I think now it's becoming back to pre-pandemic levels.
Mm-hmm. And have there been any permanent changes to the airport ecosystem since the pandemic?
I think everybody has been more mindful of being more touchless, the digitalization and how we process passengers. I think the innovations around that have really accelerated in touchless processing, easier facilitation, etc. I know I can speak for ACI. They have a program talking about health standards and cleanliness, and you can actually become an airport certified in these practices as well. And I just think we're all much more mindful of that. I think there's work to be done, and I know there has been work and ongoing work about what would you do, heaven forbid, if there's something like this again, and to make sure maybe more harmonization among nations in terms of similar entry-exit procedures for passengers. Can we have a better universal discussion around when you might shut borders, not shut borders, etc. And I know those discussions have continued since the pandemic at the senior levels of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Heaven forbid that it comes back, but we'd be foolish to not be prepared in a more global way next time.
Well, and I think one of the things that airports do well, a lot of after-action reports. I think out of the culture of safety, right, you always look at if there's an incident, at least here at our airport, I know, many airports around the world, you should sit down, evaluate that incident. What are lessons learned? And so I know all airports and ACI, working with its other global partners, have done that with the pandemic and trying to learn from what we did right, maybe what we could have done better, right, to avoid any issues if there's a future situation.
Absolutely. And looking to the future, you have a 2-year term at ACI World. What are you hoping to achieve in that time?
Well, I think, one, I really want to make sure that the association stays focused on its mission, because it is a valuable mission, because the mission of ACI is to contribute to the safety, security, and sustainability of the aviation industry. And when you have an industry that supports 87 million jobs globally, is to stay focused on that mission. And so I'm proud to lead a board made up of 24 plus individuals from around the world. And it's a great table to sit around to talk about how we can coordinate and help each of our particular regions grow and participate. So that's mission number one. There's going to be an ICAO assembly in the fall of 2025, right, to make sure that we get the airport's needs represented in that forum. So that'll be something to work on. And then mission number one that I'm focused on right now is the CEO of the organization, and we call him the Director General, will be leaving us at the end of 2024. So we're doing a global search for the next leader of that organization. And so that's mission number one, is to make sure we have continued strong leadership at the helm.
Absolutely. And when you're on the search for that new leader, how important is diversity and inclusion when you're thinking about fulfilling that role?
I think the search will be broad. It will encompass every region of this world. And we want someone who can connect on a human level, not only from a regulatory standpoint and advocacy on the world stage, but understand the human issues. And to do that, you have to give great consideration to diversity and inclusion. A huge focus of mine in particular. I think, workforce development is something I think we do particularly well here at CVG because we understand what it can do to the value of having people contribute and having good jobs. And in order to sustain our airports going forward, we need to be more inclusive and bring everyone in and have a chance for them to participate in our industry. And I'm not only talking kind of on, say, race, gender, sexual orientation, but things like in the U.S., we have a particular issue maybe with folks that we call second chance citizens, people who have been incarcerated but need to find employment now. We'd love to bring them in and figure out a way. People who have differing abilities. We've had some success hiring some people on the autism spectrum, and they're working successfully in some of our jobs. So how do we be very broad in including everyone in this great industry that I love so much, right? That it's done so much for my career and has afforded me a good livelihood for my family, and I'd like to bring everybody into it. So I think as we look for the next Director General, I know we will do a very broad search, and who knows what candidate we'll end up with, but it'll be somebody that is committed to making sure we're inclusive in our industry.
Over the summer, at least in the UK, coming out of COVID, we had quite a few problems with labour shortages at the airports. Is fulfilling that sort of labour shortage part of your mission when you're looking broadly for candidates?
No, I think labor shortages that you experienced in the UK were not unique. I think maybe a little more pronounced or a little more publicized than maybe other areas of the globe. But it's not unique to the UK, and we've had our own similar challenges right here at CVG. Trying to find people that I think, particularly in the UK, it was around ground handlers, because that's tough work. You're out in the elements 365 days of the year at all sorts of shifts, and I don't think people appreciate the physicality of that job, the demands of that job. And so that is an area of focus for ACI. It's a personal focus of mine to make sure we can work with the other trade associations to put the allure back in airport jobs. How do we make people understand that everyone has a place at the airport, whatever skill set you have, be it, whether you're a high-level CFO with a great degree in finance, or you're somebody who is just entering the workforce and don't have a trained skill set. There is a role for you here as part of those, like I said, nearly 88 million jobs around the globe, and we need to keep bringing more people into it. Because as the UK incidents over the summer demonstrated, if you have a chink anywhere along that travel ribbon, the whole system's going to go, be in disarray, right? So we all have to work together to figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that I found so fascinating about learning about airports while working in aviation is the seamless journey of cargo, of passengers, of the planes themselves, of the crew, all moving throughout the airport with so many touch points, but no chinks along the way. And when we introduce more digital products and more automation, are you seeing that becoming even more seamless, taking out some of the human error gaps?
Yeah, I look at the automation and the digitalization, maybe not taking out so much, removing the humanity or the chinks. It's really supplementing the humans that we don't have to perform certain jobs, right? To free them up for maybe a higher and better use. One of the things we're starting to test here are automated baggage delivery carts, right? Are there certain tasks that can be done that are very rote, that can be handled. So then you can free up those people who were the cart drivers or the people that were loading and unloading the bags to do different work. Or we here at CVG have autonomous floor scrubbers running around our terminal building. Well, that doesn't mean we don't have the need for as many housekeepers, but now we can deploy them in a different way. Hopefully it smooths out any kinks, but I think it really just supplements where we need additional work done.
And where do you see airports in 10 years? If you could sort of imagine a perfect airport or something that doesn't exist yet, sort of what is the airport of the future like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because ACI is also working on a study with that right now, taking a look at, here in the US or say Europe, we're a very developed model. There's not many new airports being built. There's not many greenfields that you can find. But I think, what's happening in India, happening in Africa, looking at some of these areas where they're able to build airports from scratch, I think it'll be really interesting to see how they handle the sustainability issues, what they put in relative to innovation. I think interesting. I think we'll definitely more work around autonomous will definitely happen. I think certainly heightened screening that you won't even know that you're being screened in terms of, kind of an easier facilitation through to try to eliminate some bottlenecks along the way. I think it'll just continue evolving to be a fascinating industry. One of the things that's happening, of course, is all of the vertiports that are happening, the UAS development. What does that mean for delivery of packages, eventually people? How does that all integrate into the airspace system? I think that's all interesting technology to come.
So are you seeing some of those more smaller, private, sort of new types of aircraft as being complementary to the current airport system, or are you seeing them operating a completely different hub model?
I don't know yet. I think it's new, right? I would hope that we figure out how to make them complementary. I think back to the Wright brothers and the founding of this industry and how marvelous and exciting and interesting it must have been, and we've come so far so fast. So I hope we continue to lean into new technologies, but welcome them into what is already an established industry now. I think that will be the key to evolving, as opposed to creating maybe two separate sort of modes of operation. I don't think the airspace is limited, right? And so we're going to have to figure out how to integrate all of this in a way that still provides movement for passengers and goods that is fairly seamless.
You mentioned that your airport is a dual hub for DHL and Amazon cargo.
I'm going to use that phrase, dual hub. I love that.
Fantastic. You can have it. Have you noticed that those businesses and those brands are pioneering new technology and development and sustainability?
Oh, definitely. So I think both of those companies are fascinating. So DHL, we're their largest hub in the Americas. They call us their second largest global super hub. And we work very well with them to figure out what they're doing in terms of technology, innovation, moving goods. And then literally right across the street from them is Amazon, and their hub opened here I want to say in 2021. Again, I think they call us their mega hub. We're their largest hub anywhere right now. And with their largest fleet of robotic equipment in this building. You go over there and it sort of gives you a little feeling of, what was that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie? Where all the robots start taking over. It gives you a little bit of that feeling when you walk in. But I think it's, again, fascinating. And I just took a tour of their operations center last week. It's amazing the thing that Amazon's tracking that I know DHL is able to track, and the movement of these goods to be able to, order it one day and it shows up at your house the next day and how all of this works. A part that's manufactured here or a part that's manufactured elsewhere, and it's going to show up in the Middle East tomorrow it just is an amazing industry. And that has contributed to a lot of growth at our airport. Right now, we have about 17,000 people that are badged to work on our airport, largely around the cargo carriers. And with that, we've been trying to figure out how to amplify that value chain. So we now have a school for aviation mechanics that's going to open up on our campus. We have several new hangars that have opened up, and we're trying to figure out other ways to expand that growth.
So training and development, something very important for the airport to continue to foster the new growth of labour coming through and picking up people at an early age?
Oh, 100%. I think that's an issue for every airport. One of the things that we've been able to do, I think it's a tremendous program. There's a local high school that partners with a local community college. We actually have 2 classrooms in our terminal building. So we have a classroom for our high school juniors and a classroom for our high school seniors. And they're here 3 days a week doing all of their classwork. And then they work at one of the smaller local general aviation airports on the off days. And again, we want to just keep growing that talent. And we have a private school for aviation mechanics that's going to open here probably within the next 2 months to train people to become aviation mechanics. Again, it's just a tremendous industry to be involved in, and every skill set can find their place. And we really want to attract young people to get involved, because you can have a marvelous career for decades just right here at this airport or anywhere around the world, frankly.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot of support from a grassroots level from the community where the airport is based.
Oh, definitely, right? So our HR team attends local job fairs. We work with, the community colleges. We work with high schools. We do tours here. And that's not unique. Most airports around the world do similar things because, face it, we're the closest to the communities in terms of jobs, etc. We're trusted neighbors, and we want to be good employers. And I think that's what most airports lean into, is trying to figure this out. If you want to continue to operate a successful business and be able to grow, having the right human capital and the number of people you need with the right skills is paramount, and you have to grow your own in most cases.
Definitely. I'm not sure there's any part of the aviation industry that isn't experiencing that same sort of push into seeking talent from diverse pools, from interesting places, and trying to pick them up at a grassroots level. Because, as you say, working in aviation, it's so broad. There are so many sub-industries within it, and there's so much opportunity to travel, work overseas, work in a different city, work in a different state. It's such an all-encompassing industry that I think people are surprised every time when they hear about aviation being there.
No, exactly right. And I think the world is so interconnected right through aviation, and it's just a great way to experience the world and the global issues. And you realize, people are all the same no matter where you are. And I've been able to meet fascinating people in all corners of the world because of this tremendous industry.
Me too. It's been lovely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure speaking.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. I could talk airports all day, all night, so I appreciate it.
First Flight is a production of FlightGlobal and is hosted and executive produced by Amber Elias. Audio production by storysolutions.net. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions, or for commercial opportunities, please email podcast@flightglobal.com, and more information can be found in the show notes. Listen, rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.